You ever notice that some exercises together feel really good and others are just kind of or sometimes they don't even feel good at all together? Well, at Further Fitness, we make a really concerted effort at being very particular with the way that we pair our exercises. Sometimes it's just out of convenience so we get a nice full body workout and the machines are close to each other. But when we've got a specific exercise that we're working on, we're trying to get people good at, we pair it with what we call active rest. Now, active rest essentially means, if you're trying to go strong and get heavy in an exercise, you want a couple of minutes in between sets to catch your breath before you hit it again. Now, we don't want to waste that time, so we'll pair you with an exercise that does one of two different things. One, it could help increase your range of motion and mobility so that when you get back to that exercise, it's looking better. Or it can be more of an activation exercise for something that we might not do intensely enough, and a part of that exercise that we want to get even better. Let me give you an example. Last month, when we were doing overhead presses here at Further Fitness, a lot of people were commenting about how good it felt when they went back to do the lat stretch we had them pair up with the overhead press. Now, the reason why we did this is because one of the major limitations for people for a good overhead press with a barbell is tight lats. It'll kind of keep them a little restricted and they can't get all the way up there and it feels a little stuck. Now, what we had people do in between sets is what we call PMF Flat Stretch. I won't get into too much detail, but it's basically a contract, relax. So instead of just lengthening the muscle, we're lengthening it but strengthening it at the same time in that new range. So they would do the stretch, go back to the overhead press and be like, holy cow, that feels way better, because they'd have a lot more freedom to get into a good position. Now, on the flip side, what we're doing this month with our overhead press is an activation exercise, specifically a glute bridge. And it's basically you lie on your back, support the shoulders, bend the knees, and squeeze the butt up, kind of like think Jane Fonda back from the late 80s. And we're getting the butt activated while stabilizing our spine, because one of the other things that people often do that needs to be improved upon with their overhead press is they're pressing the weight and they're focusing on getting the weight up, but their midsection's kind of floppy, or they're hyperextending their back and their legs and hips aren't locked in. So the more we can train them in between sets to think about locking and stabilizing their spine and squeezing that butt nice and tight, the next time they get back into the set, those legs are engaged, the butt's tight, abs are locked in, and we stabilize their spine to protect it. The hips are there, and they've got a much firmer base of support, and now, boom, they can really drive the weight up because they're rock solid. Another example of the two sides is what we've been doing the past 2 months with the deadlift. So with the deadlift on the PMF stretch, we'll do our psoas stretch that helps actually open up the hip flexors, because we spend so much time seated these days that when we have someone doing a deadlift coming up, they actually are they're a little limited at the end range. They don't get full good hip extension because they're so tight. So on the mobility side, we can have them opening up that hip flexor. And then this month on the stability side, we have them doing what we call like a stick lat activation drill. And they just take a wooden dowel and drive it into their thighs and engage their lats for about 5 to 10 seconds. And this does two things. And they go back to the deadlift and they go to grab the bar. It helps teach them to take the weight and pull it in closer to their center of gravity, which decreases the amount of shear force going through their spine as they pick things up. On the other side, it basically works as like a suspension bridge, because your lats come from up top in the shoulder girdle and then tie into your thoracolumbar fascia. When it's engaged, it creates this line of tension that helps the back resist falling over in gravity and keeps it pulled nice and tight. So those are the couple of ways that we play with our active rest to get the most out of our programs here. If you'd like a first-hand experience of what it feels like to apply these concepts to a cohesive training program and then see how the results transfer over into your everyday life and activities, then I highly recommend you take advantage of our ridiculously generous trial offer. You can click the link below to find out more.